Welcome to Cinemaholics, a special bonus episode of the show where we are covering the Sundance 2021 Film Festival. I'm John Negroni from the Cinemaholics main show, and with me I have my usual co-host from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, pop culture writer for Cinema Blend. It is Will Ashton.
Hello, hello.
And our special guest, he's been on Cinemaholics so many times, we're starting to think that he will never leave. It is Corey Woodruff.
I don't want to pay rent, but thank you. Welcome.
Squatters' rights. Coming to us from, of course, Nashville, Tennessee, forgot to mention. Corey, how are you doing?
I am good, John. How are you?
I'm good. It's always fun to talk to you on Cinemaholics and beyond. And we have just come out of it. We've come through something pretty unique, the three of us. All three of us attended this year's virtual Sundance Film Festival, and I believe it was the first Sundance for both Corey and Will, correct?
It is.
Yeah, which is great. It's not, I think, what either of you might have envisioned if you ever considered doing Sundance for the first time.
I was going to be asking about that because I wasn't sure like how this compared to a normal year. I mean, obviously, there's a little bit more like momentum, like you're going places and like a bunch of people are around, and it's probably more like ceremonial and stuff like that. But
oh yeah,
the experience of like finding these films and stuff, was that similar or was that also completely different?
Was it similar? No, not really. It really,
Okay.
It's a totally different thing. And we're going to be recapping definitely like our experience with the festival, how the virtual stuff went over. And of course, we're going to be discussing some of the buzziest movies that came out the fest and our favorites, of course. And I think between the three of us, we saw almost everything, I want to say. There's probably only like maybe 10 or 15 films that we didn't see. I'm just guessing though.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few that I missed that I wanted to see, like The Pink Cloud. I don't think any of us watched that, but I know that one got a good bit of traction.
Maybe Strawberry Mansion. I don't think.
Yeah, Strawberry Mansion was one I missed as well. I believe Corey saw How It Ends, but that was one that
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that was one I wanted to see, just out of curiosity. I didn't really get good reviews, but I was curious with the cast and the people involved. But oh well.
Yeah. One thing about this festival that did make it very different, not just the fact that it's virtual, is the fact that this year, more than any other year, this is my third Sundance and my second year covering it like fully press accredited. But for me, the most different thing was all the group chats. I was in way more group chats this year. And I think it's because there's just way more people who got to attend the festival, who got to actually watch the films. So there's way more activity. There's way more chatter. Whereas like when you're actually in Park City, I mean, there's just not as many people, like there's people who go, but it's a smaller pool. And for that reason, most of your conversations about the films are happening, in line while you're waiting for the films. Whereas like the conversation on these group chats was like never ending because people were watching things virtually. So they were able to like multitask and they were able to like watch things, while they were like, maybe like live, messaging people about the films, which I don't know. How do you feel about that, Will? Do you think that was bad overall? Like the fact that we didn't have that focused experience where we could just watch the movies and not really get distracted?
Somewhat. I mean, I think one thing that was really interesting about this year is that it was a lot of the movies were more broadly available, not just to critics, but to like general people who could buy an online ticket and check it out who weren't in Park City. And, like it had a little bit of a wider response, I feel like, so that,
it's not as exclusive.
Yeah. So like some of these movies that might have been in danger of being overhyped kind of got a, interesting, like a kind of more muted response maybe than some other films that they would have in like previous years where only a small pool of people who have seen them and then they can say whatever about them and then other people would see them 8 or so months down the line and be like, oh, that wasn't actually this good or it wasn't like that. The response felt a little bit more varied for most of these films because of that, which I think is pretty interesting. But
yeah, I want to give an example. Actually, the movie Mass, like the first wave of that, which was like hyper positive, immediately was like hit with backlash, whereas like normally it would have probably taken at least a couple of days. Well, I just feel like people like immediately were like, oh, festival, the altitude is affecting people already, because I know people were really digging Mass as soon as it had premiered, and then a bunch of more people were able to see it like as soon as that happened because they still had time in their window. And people were like, okay, calm down, it's not actually like the best film in a generation. It's actually just it's good.
Yeah, I saw it when it premiered, so I didn't see that high wave of response, only like kind of like a smaller response to that. But I'll take your word for it. The one I saw where that happened was Prisoners of the Ghostland, where like the first like couple responses from critics were like very high. as you would expect, like, like, oh, this is so wow, it's so crazy. And then shortly thereafter, we got kind of the, typical, like, okay, it's not that movie. It's not this crazy. It's not Mandy. So I find that kind of interesting in that
Yeah.
respect. Yeah. So I did notice it for a couple, but I didn't notice it with Mass personally.
Do you agree, Corey? I mean, do you think that this whole experience was it challenging? Just like I mean, okay, it's not challenging in the sense like we were comfortable. We were able to like watch these films kind of at our leisure a bit. But I mean, do you think there were some pros and cons to that?
I think there can be. I think that what this festival style does is it gives you much more autonomy than if you were like on ground in Utah. Like I was thinking, I made a schedule before all this started, and very rarely did I actually stick to that schedule unless there was a film like On the Count of Three or Mass
Yeah,
or Prisoners of the
same
Ghost
here.
Line, where I was like, I really want to watch this in this time frame. To kind of be at the point where it's like this is something I was really looking forward to beforehand. So I'm kind of like, I don't know, like there were some movies where it's like if I had showed up to the theater, I would not have left and I would have stayed and watched it. But I know there were a couple where I was just kind of like, I'm not really into this. I've got plenty of time to hop to something else. The windows are very easy to access. I'm just going to go watch something else. I'm not worried about it because this is not really my thing early on. And I feel like obviously cell phones are difficult because it's just like when you stare at a TV screen for 12 hours. Like actually during Mass, I actually paused the movie for like 30 minutes because it's like I kind of needed just like a half second to catch my breath because of the intensity. But then like my wife came home and we kind of talked for a second and I restarted the movie. Like it's such a weird way to consume film in this way because again, some of these movies will be things we hear about months from now, and I think that the hype machine of festival reactions, I think sometimes like it is a bit like hearing like a really fire and brimstone like sermon at church where people get on those like spiritual highs and then you kind of come back to earth and everything kind of calms down. But I feel like that happens every year. Like I remember when Me, Earl and the Dying Girl came out, and I love
Oh yeah.
but like that just got rapturous praise and I think it's wonderful. But and that's like that's going to win Best Picture. It's this new emerging amazingness, and I think Alejandro Gomez Rejon is going to be a really good filmmaker if he finds the right project. But I just that movie never went anywhere, and I
Yeah,
think that we've
people
had.
thought it was going to be Little Miss Sunshine,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
prototypical Sundance hit that like everybody's talking about, and then they just sort of assigned that praise onto Me and
Yeah.
Earl the Dying Girl a little preemptively.
Well, it's partly, I think, like the altitude, I have to assume, but I think it's also like the idea of like being in this moment where you discover that next great film. And
Yep.
I think everyone wants to have that moment where it's like, oh, I was there when this happened. Like I was
Hmm.
here when Little Miss Sunshine premiered or whatever. And it's like, it's easy to get wrapped up in that. I haven't, this is my first Sundance, as we mentioned. So I don't know if that's going to be the case for some of these films like later on, how they're perceived, but it is easy to kind of get wrapped up in that response when you see some of these films for the first time and like knowing that you see a film that could very well have that response, but most of the time won't.
It's totally a thing. It's totally a thing where you watch the film and like, you want it to be like as good as like you're feeling because then that means that like I see a lot of like clout chasing, people trying to have the soundbite, the like reaction tweet that is going to, be picked up and everything like that, which is why for me, like I avoided that completely. Like I did some like tweets, like a bit of a thread of like my letterbox reactions, but I was very, very limited. And eventually I just stopped doing it entirely because I just felt like I was in too much danger of like letting, because when you're watching all these films like over like back to back, you kind of just start to lose sight, you start to lose a little bit of like objectivity, because like I think fatigue sets in a way that I don't think it sets in when you do like a live film festival, because like in a live film festival I just feel like when you go from theater to theater and you have more like decompression in between the films, which is hard to do in the virtual sense, I think it's a lot easier to like go in with like a clean slate. Whereas like in the virtual film fest, I found myself watching things back to back because I didn't have time otherwise. And I had times of decompression, but it was like few and far between. I know, Will, that was the thing for you too, because like
Yes.
I would hear you be like, oh hey, I just started this other thing because like you have no choice. You have 4 hours.
Everything became a movie at that point. Like when I went to get lunch, that was like this groundbreaking new achievement that
Mm.
is challenging the norms and all this stuff. So,
The
yeah, I mean,
coffee break
yeah,
won the next award.
right, exactly, yes. But I do think it's interesting that I think comparatively to at least last year, or the few other years, this is considered the weaker Sundance, and I'm curious if it's partly for what you're suggesting, John, which is that because there it's such a more insulated year where like everyone's kind of processing these movies at once and there's the online reactions, but for the most part everyone has to kind of like sit with these movies and realize that like, you know, a lot of them are good, some are very good, but a lot of them are just kind of fine or average. And I'm wondering if that's partly attributed to the fact that it was online and people were just with their own experiences with the films and they didn't have that collective response, or see it with a crowd where they get so like warped up in a movie like that. I'm very curious if that was part of the reason why that happened.
My opinion is that I was definitely under the impression that it was one of the weakest Sundance film festivals in recent memory for me, like probably the worst one since like 2017. And I say worst just in the sense that it was like a lot of middling films. It wasn't a lot of like wow must sees. However, I think the second half of the festival is where that completely changed for me. I think I was just like backloaded or something because literally the last day of the festival when we were catching like the awards films, I ended up seeing like three films that day that were like three of my favorite films of the whole festival that were better than a lot of the films I saw last year. So that's just how it worked out for me. And I think it kind of plays into this whole like tricky territory of like when you're doing this virtually, it's so hard to know what to see when you can't really have like you know, in real life conversations with people at the festival, which is such a big part of it because you can be talking to people in real time. You can like people overhear your conversations and then they're like, oh, I saw that. Here's what I thought of it. And now it's instead like people are just going on Letterboxd, and because they have everything in front of them, they're determining what they're going to see only based on like aggregated social media reactions, which I think is not great because then I found myself doing that where I was like, well, you know, this movie has like a bunch of 2.5s on Letterboxd. I don't know if I want to risk not, you know, seeing that when I could be like, you know, using this on-demand screening that I have for this that's about to expire. You know what I mean? Corey Woodruff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times like I would watch or not watch a movie based on what I was seeing online. I mean, and what you guys were saying, we had a little group chat going on the whole time, and like I remember when Wild Indian like had premiered. I remember Will was like, "Oh yeah, people are saying this is really, really good," and I was just like, "Oh, I want to hop into that immediately because you know I've got this window here, and I don't want to use up one of my like secondary screenings tomorrow, so I'm gonna hop on this right now." And it ended up changing where my schedule was going. You know, it's one of those things where just like I think people forget that opinion is so varied, and we have such a weird sampling of where people's opinions are, and you have so many factors. I think another factor to really think about with this festival is we've all been watching movies on our TV for an entire year. So it's just like there are some movies during this festival, and I felt this all through last year where I thought like, is this going to be better if I watch this in a theater? Like, am I going to have more of a positive experience engaging with this film if I'm able to see it the way that it was supposed to be seen? And obviously, there's something you can do about that. But I think when I've seen so many, this is the first time I've ever done something like this because I've done the Nashville Film Festival a couple of times and I've seen a lot of movies in a very short span of time. But I've never engaged with film like this where I have not known a single thing about what I was watching going in outside of very rare, you know, single reactions. And then I'm watching that on my TV for the first time. So it's such a weird filter to put on how we're engaging with stuff. But I also feel like that there's this strange quandary, right, of what social media is doing to influence when you have so much availability between you to make choices. Because I'm guessing there are so many logistical nightmares of doing this festival on ground to where it's like you don't really have a choice at times. If you hear one thing is good and another thing isn't good and you're there for the other thing, it's like, well, that's like a 15, 20-minute commute. I can't do that.
Yeah, you the theaters are spread out. You have to like, you know, the movies are playing like all across Park City and in some cases even in Salt Lake City, which is like a 30-40 minute drive, and it's January, so it's hard to get around if you don't know how to drive in the snow, stuff like that. I would say like I really want to say the two films I felt that way that you mentioned, Corey, of like I wonder if I would have liked this more in a theater were Prisoners of the Ghostland, which I really wonder if that would have clicked with me because I ended up not caring for it. The Nicolas Cage one where it's like Mad Max with like, you know, samurai or whatever. It couldn't hold my attention. And I just found it like very uneven. And the other film is We're All Going to the World's Fair, which I feel like I should love. Like I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and the whole point of that movie but I think the whole point of that movie is being sucked in this like dark theater, like a Paranormal Activity sort of situation. And like that's where the dread and the horror comes in. But I think like because I'm watching it and, you know, on this monitor, I'm not, you know, really like in the right atmosphere for this film to work, I guess.
This one is going to provoke a reaction out of you, John. I felt the film where I was like, I think I would like this even more if I saw it in theaters, was One for the Road,
I
which
knew, I
I
knew it.
liked it. I mean, I did like the film, but I felt like if I saw this in theaters, I feel like this would be a more overwhelming experience. But watching it at like, 12 o'clock the last day of the film festival, I felt like I think part of the burnout might have affected my appreciation for it because it is, like this 2.5 hour film that, it is pretty taxing to watch at that point. But yeah, I mean, that I definitely had that there. And to a lesser extent, I feel like even though I really like Judas and the Black Messiah, I feel like I probably would have liked it even more than I already do if I saw it in theaters, because that was a film that I feel like was made for the big screen. It felt very odd to see it premiere on a computer screen, at least in my perspective. But
We
yeah,
should actually talk about it. Wait, how did you both watch movies? For me, I watched them on an LG 5K display. So it's like it's a big 5K display. And if I wasn't liking it that much and I was like group chatting, I was pretty particular. My rule was I never used my phone. My rule was I always had like the movie playing like half the screen, and then I had like the group chat right next to it, so I could do both things, and which I still feel like is a bit of a cheat. I did not do that
that
for the films I
explains
really
it.
liked, though.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing that I did was I went on walks. So I have unlimited data, so I was able to like go on a walk and like watch a movie on the screen. If it wasn't like very like cinematography, like investing, like if it was kind of like a low laid back sort of movie, like Together, I watched most of that while walking because it's the kind of film that's more about the dialogue, more about the performances, and I promise I looked both ways before I crossed the street. But that was cool because I was able to break things up. I was able to like exercise, you know what I mean? And I think it really worked out for me because I think the films I watched while on a walk I ended up really liking. I don't think I disliked almost any of them. But what about you, Corey? What was your format?
We've got a Sony Bravia TV, and my wife was very, very gracious to let me dominate our couch for like the last few days, and almost week really. And I kind of did a mix of like casting it off my phone on the Sundance app, and then through my computer through AirPlay. So it was kind of like how I've been watching movies. So obviously I haven't been to the movies in forever, like actual sense. So I've just gotten so used to watching movies at home, and you kind of had to force yourself to do that, long, long ago. But it was weird. It's so weird. Like Will was talking about Judas and the Black Messiah. It's like I went to Tenet in the theater, and I remember I saw that trailer in theaters. I'm like, that would be such an amazing movie to see with the sound and just the performance like in that big way. And I ended up watching it like on my television, and like later in the day. So it was a strange way of engaging with film that way.
Yeah, I wanted to watch things on a TV, but I just couldn't because my partner like usually works in our living room because of COVID, so would not have been very fair to her. So I had a whole office to myself to watch all of these. It was very comfy and cozy. I had my space heater, so I was very content. What about you, William Tyler? I know that you probably watched most of these from the Pittsburgh library.
Yeah, pretty much. No, I watch these all these on my computer. I probably have the setup to watch them on my TV, but I wasn't 100% sure, and I didn't want to risk like like some tech mishap or something like that, or if my family wanted to use the TV for whatever reason. So I just decided to watch them all on my computer, which is a bit of a bummer, only because like some of these movies I think I would have preferred seeing on a screen that wasn't a few inches wide. But I mean, I think seeing them by myself in like kind of like basement area here was at least interesting in that I could feel the Park City experience of being cold, and like if a movie wasn't that good, I could kind of feel that miserable experience of like being cold and frustrated with a film that I wasn't quite connecting with and stuff, which I think is probably the closest I could get from my home to the Park City experience, at least based on what you have told me in the past, John. So I did my
Absolutely.
best. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to talk about our favorite films of the festival, and then we'll end with like just a general, like overall, what the film is kind of meant to you in like more of a general sense. But before we talk about the really good stuff, was there one or two films you want to say that maybe disappointed you a lot, or are so bad that it's actually worth mentioning? We'll start with you, Corey. I don't know. I don't remember you disliking things that much, although I remember you mentioning a few that you did not care for.
It's tough. One of the movies I was really excited to see was How It Ends. I like Zoe Lister-Jones a lot. I think she's a very talented actress. I think that her voice is it's very refined for where she is in her writing career. And I was very curious to see what she would bring to the table. It's clearly one of the movies that was shot during the pandemic, so obviously we're about to see just a boatload of movies that are based on the pandemic. It's going to change the way a lot of narrative storytelling is just done, because you're going to have like, oh, it's going to be this quirky comedy about people who fall in love during a pandemic. It's going to be that across the board. But this film like tries to use the cleared streets in LA and everything to like mimic like an end of the world scenario. And it sounded really good on paper, but it's just one of those things where I imagine that like the production was very enjoyable and the ideas popped on the page when they wrote it. And it was great getting like all these cameos in place, and, you know, they kind of just let it run the way it was. But I just didn't think the film really connected at all with what it was trying to do, with like a bunch of inside humor, which to me is kind of the main pratfall for a film like this, is that like you think this is funny, but I may not think this is funny. I thought it was paced strangely. Some of this, the humor didn't really work. And again, Lister Jones is a very talented actress in comedy, and like, you know, she can hold her own with a lot of material. But she was really one of the only parts about the movie, like her performance, I thought worked. There was like a weird meta textual plot going on at the same time. Like I don't know. It wasn't really my bag. And then I don't know. I was very careful about what I watched. I think that was one of the things this festival where it was like, if I saw something not getting good notices, I just did not want to waste my time with it. So I had a really nice success rate, because I only saw like,
I worry about that though, Corey, because there were some that I saw that I was cautioned against and told by one, for example, Will Ashton, that wouldn't be good. And I was like, well, Will, I think for myself, bro. And I ended up seeing them. They ended up being some of my favorite films in a generation. So, you know, it's just all about, Corey. Sometimes you just got to take that risk.
You do. I do. And if I did not have so much to do during the week after the week, because the weekend I watched everything I wanted. Like I got through as much as I possibly could. It just like when the work week hits and it's just like crap. Like I would love to just block out.
I took the week off. I just, you know,
I might have. Now that I think back, I wish I would have had more time to like engage with everything, because you're right. Like I think that is a legitimate downfall to this, is that like there is no room for discovery. Like there were very rarely films, and I think that's because you have such a like availability in front of you. There's just so many options to choose from, where it's just like I don't want
fear of missing out. FOMO.
Yeah, exactly.
It was big. It was huge. Like worse than like being in person.
But it's interesting, and I kind of am with Will on First Date. Like I liked Tyson Brown a lot in his like performance, but I thought that film was obviously kind of cloying in the way that it's just so obviously referencing other stuff. But that's also a movie where it's like I'm not really going to remember much about it in like a week. Like it's kind of a blip on the radar. But those are the only two. That's legitimately the only two films where I'm kind of like, I don't really think that was that good. Everything else I saw was either like good to great.
All right. What about you, Will? I mean, I know there's a couple that you did not care for, and I think we share one of them, but I'll let you.
Yeah. I mean, there are only two films I saw that I thought were genuinely like top to bottom bad. One I think was meant to be bad, so I'm kind of wrestling with how I should approach it. And the other one, I think, as Corey mentioned, was First Date, which I think was trying to be this kind of cutesy, nostalgic film that was referencing a bunch of filmmakers. And I seem to be on the outskirts, because most of the people I've seen responding to it are not overwhelmingly positive, but they're like, yeah, it's cute, it's fun. And I just don't know what movie they saw, because the movie I saw was just I found very tedious and frustrating and full of itself in a way that I found pretty insufferable. But like Corey said, I do think that lead performance in that film does carry some decent weight and helps gloss over some of the difficulties I had with the narrative and the supporting characters. But the movie that I think you're referring to, John, is, and I got to make sure I say this right so I don't swear on the air, but Mother Schmuckers, which is the
yes.
I think it was French, right? The French comedy that's trying to be, from what I can tell, basically John Waters' Dumb and Dumber, which on paper sounds amazing.
It sounds
I think
us.
that sounds like this. Yeah, it sounds like a fun, like, especially late in the festival or late night into the festival. Like it's fun. It's 70 minutes. It could be really goofy and silly and sweet, and it's obviously trying to go for this like sort of transgressive anti-PC comedy, which I think I almost want to give it credit for being as like deliberately stupid as it wants to be, and so against good taste and everything that it's trying to do. But I ultimately just found it was crass for the sake of being crass, and it's like after a point, it's just like it any sort of like quote unquote shocks that were supposed to be elicited kind of got dull just because the movie just has no like real desire to do anything besides being like cloying and like cutesy and poking the bear basically. And I don't know, I just found it to be nothing really worthwhile, and I can see why it's got such a overwhelmingly negative response. I'm not quite as negative on it as you and a few others are, but ultimately I can see why that was considered the worst of Fest, and it would be for me if I didn't
Yeah.
see First Date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason I gave it, so on Letterboxd, I gave it 1 star. I didn't give it half because at least it was only an hour and 10 minutes.
It is
that was
very
its
short.
one saving grace.
Mhm.
Yeah, this movie is just awful. Easily the worst film I've ever seen at Sundance. Like, far and away, just terribly, terribly acted, terribly, like, the staging is horrible. There's no coherence to it. It's just trying to be stupid for the sake of it, and that can be okay in some contexts, but yeah, no, this movie I think people should actively like steer clear from unless like I mean I know there's an audience for it out there, but like nobody I know, so I'll put it that way. For me, yeah, I mean that was the only one I outright disliked, like heavily disliked. I mean there were just some films that I thought were more mediocre than they deserved to be, and there were some films I was really surprised, like really disappointed in, like Glitch in the Matrix, which was the last film I saw because I saw that today, um, after the fact, and I just was like, my word, like, how is like my philosophy course from my sophomore year in college more insightful about the Matrix than this documentary with a great budget and really great like techniques and ideas, and or not ideas, but I guess like the way they sort of like illustrate their points. But I've just never been more like underwhelmed by a documentary with this kind of like subject matter. Like, it's all about simulation theory, and I found it to be completely like dense with itself. It like dovetails into like this whole like true crime thing that I'm like, okay, that's not okay. Like if you're gonna bring these things up, like discuss them, analyze them, bring people on who have something insightful to say about them besides like basic platitudes you can read on Reddit. Like this felt to me like a very generic, Reddit post, and it's just like a sampling of all the comments. Like I found it very odd, and I really disliked the overall message of like what they think the Matrix really represents, which I think is like just so basic. So I had a pretty poor reaction to it. Other than that, though, lots of really good documentaries, and I already mentioned I was pretty disappointed in Prisoners of the Ghostland, and I already mentioned We're All Going to the World's Fair, which are films that I think in theory really work, and I appreciate them so much.
Yeah.
And I hope they find their audience. I hope people see them and like them more than I did. One that really let me down though was Marvelous in the Black Hole, which has a great real Perlman performance. It has like so many great things going on, but it just makes it's like forced errors or unforced errors. It just like there's weird like random violence. It doesn't know if it wants to be like a tween film or just like this bizarrely randomly dark film at times. It was very odd.
Well, for me, I felt like there are two films that throughout the festival felt like your quintessential Sundancey type movies, or at least your quintessential coming of age Sundancey movies. One was Coda, which won the Grand Jury Prize, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a little bit.
It's the big one.
And the other one was Marvelous in the Black Hole. And I think for me, like, I think they have similar issues, but Coda was able to be a little bit more unique and heartfelt. And not to say that Marvelous in the Black Hole isn't heartfelt, but like it had, I think, a little bit more going for it in a way that even though it had those cliches and those familiar tropes, it was able to overcome them with such like beautiful performances and these moments that really do emotionally work. And I know a lot of people really did like Marvelous and Black Hole, and I'm not going to try to take that away from them. But for me, it felt like it had the same issues, but I just didn't have much I didn't get much out of it beyond thinking like, yeah, Rhea Perlman, great actress. This is a great performance. Magic scenes are fun. Otherwise, it just kind of felt like a ho-hum, quintessentially mundane Sundancey movie that favors being cute over really saying anything unique or profound. So yeah. I ultimately found it to be a similarly disappointing experience.
That's enough negativity though. We've been so negative. Let's talk about the good stuff, And first, say how many films you saw. For me, I thought I was going to see more. I saw 38. I miscounted. But 38, that's like a few more than I saw last year, which kind of is mind-boggling to me that I saw just as many like in person. I don't know how that happened, but regardless, this is one of those years where there were fewer films than ever, and we're not ranking, anything. You're just sort of like bring something up that you feel like you want to get off your chest. Could be your absolute favorite, could be one of your favorites. Corey, we'll start with you, starting with, how many did you see, and which one do you want to bring up first that warmed your Sundance heart?
I feel like a lightweight here. I saw 22, which to my wife makes her eyes want to like pop out of her head, being like, how many movies did you watch? But then it's like, well, I know people watching in their 30s. Like, it's strange, but like, I feel like that's tremendously a lot of movies compared to normally, like, to my normal slate of how I watch things. But I would like to have seen, but I don't know. I feel like I saw everything I had a strong desire to see, which is kind of what I would hope out of a festival like this. I kind of got everything off my list I was like super excited about. But there's one movie that, I mean, there are a handful of movies I saw that I think are legitimately great films. I think they're movies I'm going to be thinking about all year long. Like, I remember I texted a friend after watching one of these where I was just kind of like, if I don't see anything else for the rest of this year, and that's my favorite movie, like, I'm going to be set. And that was On the Count of Three. I think that film is absolutely magnificent. And it's one of those things where it's like, I kind of wanted to check myself a few days later. Like, what do you think about this? Did you get that festival bump from this? And I genuinely think it's a great film. I don't think it's, perfect, but like, then again, I feel like that's a silly qualifier in general. Like, it's just such a risk. Like, it could have been a disaster. Like, I genuinely feel like that film could have been like a Day the Clown Cried level disaster if they had handled it improperly. Like a film that would not get distributed in any way, shape, or form. But it's just got such a tender heart dealing with such just bleak subject matter. And the fact that it finds just this just dangerous level of satire and looking at desperation, but it buoys that with so much hope and really undercuts why the satire works. And Gerard Carmichael, I think, is going to be a legitimate force in directing. I think he is incredibly talented. I think his voice is so unique. There's not a ton of people, I feel like, that are working in that type of space. He does. He reminds me of what Hiro Mari is doing in Atlanta. I mean, it reminds me of that level of just like, I don't know. I feel like people say like WandaVision's like David Lynchian, but to me, it's legitimate, like going back to Lynch's roots and looking at the way that he kind of unfolded his realities and the types of observations he would make about the world around him. I
definitely was not thinking of David Lynch during On the Count of Three.
Interesting.
At all.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I didn't think of David Lynch either.
I was thinking of like classic like 80s buddy comedies, but like mixed with like an A24 sensibility.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of like you said, Atlanta, but like with a kind of Safdie brother edge to it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
there's definitely like a Safdie blend in there, but I don't know. Blue Valentine came to my mind. Blue Velvet popped in my mind when I was
about to say Michelle Williams, really?
Yes,
I mean the same hair color.
It's a delightful film.
I mean, they're both very tragic films, I would have to say.
But I don't know. That one is like, if I had to pick one, well, there are a handful of people I think that are going to come out of this festival that are going to have very advantageous directorial careers. But that one just hit me with a shovel. It's just such a beautiful, but it's bold. And I just feel like that when you take risks like that with telling stories that could potentially be so problematic, if you pull it off and you pull it off with such grace and such tact, it's just like, I can't wait for that to get distributed and that to find its audience. Like, I don't think it's an awards film or anything, but like, it will easily be one of my favorite movies when the year is said and done. I cannot say enough good things about it.
I think it's probably going to come out in the summer, and it's going to find definitely like a more avant-garde audience, like the typical A24 fashion. I could see it being like the uncut gem slot of like the holiday season, but I don't think it's an awards film, like you said. Not that it shouldn't be, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies, and I think all three of us consider it one of our favorites, not to speak for Will, but yeah, I mean, it was the first film I saw at Sundance where I was like, okay, this is like what I came here for. Coda was the first thing I saw, and I really enjoyed Coda. Coda is like an obvious, like, of course, like it's a big crowd pleaser. I enjoyed watching it a lot. I had a lot of personal, flavor with it, and I really appreciate it. But On the Count of Three is like, the kind of movie that like makes me like feel alive, like makes me, I mean, no pun intended, right? But I think like what it showcases with Jared Carmichael as a emerging filmmaker here is, first of all, he is fantastic at getting really great dramatic performances out of comedians. As a comedian himself, I think what he's able to do with like Tiffany Haddish and Henry Winkler, who they've done dramatic turns before, but I think sometimes in other films and
And
properties, it can be kind of hard to like get people to not think of like their more infamous characters, comedic
mhm.
characters. And Carmichael is just like, as a director, I think he's just really good at like breaking through that and like bringing out like real people out of, these performances, I guess.
Yeah, and also JB Smooth as well. And I
Oh
think
yeah, yeah.
JB Smooth and Henry Winkler, what's so fascinating to me about their casting is that they play totally against their image. Like they're both playing characters that are way against like what you expect. Like, like this is way different than what you'd see from JB Smooth on Curb Your Enthusiasm, or like Henry Winkler, even on his darker stuff like Barry. Like it's just a completely different character than what we're used to seeing, and
Yeah.
to I think great effect. And yeah, that's one of many things I would champion about the film for sure.
It's a really good one. Before we move on though, is there anything else you wanted to add, Will, about On the Count of Three? I mean, is it one of your
Yeah,
favorites too, or yeah?
it is my favorite. Yeah, I mean, of the ones I saw, like I think the best made film that I saw at the festival was Judas and the Black Messiah. Like I think everything about that was firing on all cylinders. It's such a furious, commanding film that I think that's going to get a lot of recognition, and deservedly so. For me personally, though, my favorite film, like the one that affected me the most emotionally, the one that just like you said, like that was that quintessential Sundance experience of like, okay, this is the movie, like this is the type of movie I came to see at this festival. That was that movie, and like you were saying, like Corey, where everything about it could have easily fallen apart at any given moment. It's like this kind of like House of Cards, where it's like everything about it could easily just crumble if they took a wrong step or did a wrong thing. And that's not to say it's perfect. Like there are a couple, there's a couple moments where it's trying to be kind of edgy that it didn't work for me, or kind of soured the tone a bit. And there's a couple things that happened towards the end that I'm sure are going to divulge into some heavy think pieces. But
Yeah.
I think what it does so well is so astoundingly good that it just works. It just goes against all perceived knowledge of like what you would think it could do, and just becomes even better. I don't want to hype it up too much, because I imagine some people are going to see this in a few months and be like, oh, it wasn't that great, or like, oh, it was good, it was amazing. Because I've seen that response from some people, and I understand that, because it is, it's a difficult film because it deals with very heavy subject matters in a kind of light and flippant way. So I can understand if it's not going to appeal to everyone. But for me personally, I was like, okay, this is my bag. This is definitely the type of film I like, and I'm just so very happy that it worked as well as it did. And once again, I think it proves that Christopher Abbott, no offense to Adam Driver, is the best Girls alumni. I think he is doing some of the best work, some of the most
Wow.
interesting work.
Huh.
I love Adam Driver too. I think he's a fantastic actor, but
I
Christopher
mean,
Abbott's just,
Abbott's
yeah.
a secret weapon for indie movies. You put him in your movie, and it's like, I don't know, he takes it to an 11, I think.
Yeah, I mean he's just doing some really great stuff, and I mean he's thriving right now, I think. And yeah, I'm really excited to see his career go forward. And then, like you two were saying, I'm very excited to see if Gerard Carmichael continues to make a film, continues to direct films. I mean, because I would be very excited to see his directorial career after
Yeah.
this. But
I think
no
we
matter
all
what, I'm
could
gonna,
both say
yeah,
that.
yeah.
For
I
sure.
mean, no matter what he does, I'm very curious to see what he does, because he's such a boundary pushing comedian and entertainer that it's clear that he's going to have a pretty outstanding career. And yeah, that's one of many reasons why this was my favorite film of the festival.
Back to Christopher Abbott, I did see him in another film, World to Come, which
Oh
is
yeah.
like the annual, or I guess biannual at this point. Get it?
Mhm.
Lesbian period romance. I mean, it's every year. I mean, it's becoming like
Every
a
six
thing of
months.
like white lesbian period romance.
Yeah.
It's like it's a lot. I mean, we just had Ammonite, Tiff.
Yeah.
It's just like I'm confused. And he's really good in the movie, by the way.
They're
He's
all
like
very good.
he's very, very like it's despicable in it.
Sure.
Um, but my word, I don't know what's going on. I think one movie we didn't see that like kind of plays is supposed to play with that a little bit was I don't think either of you saw RJ or whatever it is, a Romeo
Oh, R
Juliet
plus
hashtag
J.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there were a couple films that when I saw them on the program, I was like, I am
Yeah,
just
yeah.
going to stay clear of this.
No thanks.
And one of them was that. It just was like, Romeo and Juliet for the TikTok crowd. And it's just like,
Yeah,
nope, you can have that one. That's not for me.
you don't have to see everything. Oh yeah, Will, how many films did you see?
Oh, I saw 43 films, but keeping in mind that I saw 6 in advance. So if you tally that up, like it probably was about like 37, 38 films during the actual week of the festival. So I'm about the same as where you were, but I
Well,
saw a
yeah,
little bit
I mean,
more
I saw
often.
one in advance, and then I saw one after.
Okay, so
So
we saw
still
about the same throughout the week, I guess. We were
close,
on kind of
margin
the
of
same
error.
length. Yeah, sure.
Well, it was hard because there were some days where I was able to watch like I think the most I watched in a day was 8, and which I
Yeah,
think was
same
a
here.
record for me. I don't think I've ever watched 8 in a day before. I know I've seen 7.
I don't advise it. I mean, I
It's
would
not
just
good.
yeah, I was gonna say if you have the opportunity to watch 6 or 8 films in a day, I would maybe consider what you're doing because
Yeah.
after a point you're just like yeah, you're just a little tapped out. But
Well, I thought I was going
yeah,
to see more, but what ended up happening was like the last couple of days, the more films I was seeing were longer than I expected. So like they were eating up more time, and I was like, oh, I actually don't have time to see all the films I want to. It ended up working out because like the last couple of films I saw were some of my favorites. So there you go. You mentioned Judas and the Black Messiah, and refresh my memory, Corey. I don't think you said you saw this one, or am I
I
wrong?
did right at the that was one of the last films I watched. I was able
Okay.
to sneak it in on Wednesday.
That's one of my favorites. Like Will, I just thought it was terrific. I mean, it's just, you already mentioned it. I think this is like one of Kaluuya and Stanfield's best performance,
Yeah.
and it's crazy because like that's saying a lot with these two guys. And I think this is Stanfield's movie. I think that he kind of owns it. And I was looking into some of the history behind the film afterward, and I was like, oh my word! Like I thought some of it was way more fictitious than it actually is. But I mean, it really does like cover a lot of like real events
yeah,
that I was not aware of at all. Which I was aware of like Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, and we kind of were reminded that with Trial of Chicago 7 and everything, where I think like Calvin Harrison Jr. played Fred Hampton in a very small role.
hmm
But seeing it played out like this, I was pretty blown away. It was directed by Shaka King. Are either of you familiar with Shaka King's work?
I know of Newlyweeds, which I believe is a film he made before this. I remember hearing about it when it premiered at Sundance, but I did not see it.
He's interesting. He was a guidance counselor who
Oh yeah.
like started off. Yeah, he would like start off like curating like art festivals and stuff,
Hmm.
and yeah, he gradually became a filmmaker, and yeah, he's made a few on top of Newlyweeds, like I think Mulligans or something like that, and just some small things, but yeah, he's very cool. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, Corey Woodruff,
Yes.
what's your next favorite? What's another one that you want some
I
talk about?
it's tough because like there were so many interesting narrative films, and I think I'll just go ahead and bring it up. I think having a discussion, like a mini one on Mass, would be interesting. We're going to talk maybe about some of my docs I liked later, but Mass to me is
Oh,
such a fascinating.
sermon has begun.
Yes, it has. Yeah, all rise. But uh, I don't know. That one really hit me in the jaw. Like it's like one of those weird things where it's just like I think that's a very easy movie to come out of and just come out with just it's just like kind of even irresponsible level of just like exaltation over like this is the best picture for I don't know, that's just not my thing. But I mean I think it's a genuinely brilliantly acted film. I mean, I think that like as I'm looking back on it, I'm like, those are some outstanding performances. And I just did not think that Brian Kranz from Cabin in the Woods and who's kind of worked with Joss Whedon some over the years. And I didn't think that was the guy that was going to deliver. I think probably one of the better films I've seen recently to deal with like relevant world issues, I guess, like in such a direct way that where it's literally having an open dialogue about like how the concept is a family of a child that was killed in a mass shooting kind of after some years confronts after some time in like a very open way the parents of the child who shot their son and killed them.
At the
um
duress of the film's main character, of course, Linda, who
yes.
she may not be in every scene, but she haunts the entire picture.
Is that the lady at the church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was
Yeah,
just making a joke.
Her snacks are key and crucial to the film's sustenance, both in many key ways
I
that
mean,
word
we
is
just have the
used.
scene
Yes.
where he goes over and I don't know that movie. It's tough. I mean, it's like one of those things where I think there are like moments here and there where Kranz like tries to show that he knows like how to direct outside of just like shooting performance. I think it's actually a pretty strong direction for just letting these people go off. But I don't know. I think that movie has this just valuable sense of just like being able to acknowledge just the unquestionable just mess of what happens when, the worst thing in the world possibly comes into your lap, and how do you deal with that. And I gotta say, like, I think that Jason Isaac's really good. Martha Plimpton comeback is here. I think she's going to legitimately get some more work because of this performance alone.
Raising Hope. No,
Yeah,
she's raising hell.
I liked Raising Hope. But Ann Dowd, I'll be honest with you. I don't know of an actress right now who scares me more than Ann Dowd.
I would say character actress Margot Martindale.
She's great. Now Margot's my girl, but Margot doesn't scare me quite like Ann Dowd does.
How is there not a movie where they play sisters or something at this point?
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's true.
I would watch that movie like 18 times. Like, just, please give it to me. But she is transformative in this. Like, I hate doing the Oscar handicapping this early, but like, if she winds up getting a supporting actress nomination next year, it's like well deserved. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all, because she is, to me, one of the most valuable character actresses we have. What she is able to do to mix in just this just urgent sense of dread through just kind of like this very casual, like her character in Hereditary is still, like, to me, I think that was almost the scariest part of that movie. Just the way she slowly seeped into that family's life and just the way she would react to things. But in this film, it's just the uncomfortableness of having, the way she plays the mother of the shooter and how she tries to bring in empathy when, as an audience member, you don't want to feel it. It's just like this, but it's just like, but that's the difficulty of the film, is that it's trying to get you to have these really uncomfortable conversations within yourself. And, it's definitely, I think, going to hit some people different ways because of the way it's staged. It does feel like a play. It does feel like something you would go, see off Broadway somewhere, but I just, it's such an interesting movie. And I think it deals with the subject matter so effectively. But I got to say, if I had to pick one performance out of Sundance, it would be Dowd.
Great movie. I really enjoyed it. And I do think it'll probably get some awards recognition as, at some point. It's weird to me, though. It doesn't feel like a Sundance movie to me. It feels like a TIFF kind of thing. But I don't know. I've never
I was
been
going to say Tribeca.
Could see Tribeca for sure.
Or like New York Film Festival or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But okay. Will, what's your next favorite you got for us?
Well, yeah, like I said, after The Count of Three, I'd put Judas and the Black Messiah. But after that, I would have to say my favorite documentary of the festival. And like you were saying, John, there are quite a few documentaries that premiered at this year's festival that I thought were quite good, or at least very interesting. But the one that unsettled me or got me like the most like shook up in some way or another was the one that I think is going to probably be among the most divisive, which is All Light Everywhere, which is the surveillance film that I forget the filmmaker's name off the top of my head, but that's a film.
I thought you were going to talk about President.
I like President a lot. Yeah, I mean, President is in my top 5 as well.
Okay. I think it's Theo Anthony, by the way.
Theo Anthony, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, and I would say President, not to give anything away, but I would say that film, sorry, my phone's ringing. That film is the one that knocked out Crypto Zoo for my top 5.
They're watching you, Will.
Yes. But All Light Everywhere, this is such a like dense, hypnotic, and very unruly type film that I imagine some people are going to write it off instantly as being, like whatever, like pretentious or indulgent or, unseemly in some fashion or another. And, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't really care. But I will say that when the movie started, I was watching this at like 11 or 12 at night after 4 or 5 days of the festival, and I was like dead tired. Like I could barely keep my eyes open. I thought I might not be able to finish it. And by the end of it, I was like wired. Like I was up for like 2 hours afterwards, just because like what this movie was doing, it just got me, got on my skin, and just like, gave me a jolt. And I think it's the filmmaking. I think it's the topics that are being discussed. I think it's the boldness of how it's approaching it in such a like kind of like theological, philosophical way that, is asking all these deep questions and approaching in a way that's so layered and thematic that I don't know. I could definitely see this one being a divisive film as it goes along, but something about the kaleidoscopy, or what's the word? I forget what it is, but it did a number on me, and I think it's one of the movies that got the most of a visceral reaction from me, and I'm very excited to see what the response is because it did a number on me certainly.
I think kaleidoscopic is a pretty good characterization.
There it is, yeah, kaleidoscopic.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked this one, didn't love it. I think for me it's like my characterization of it is it's basically like a MoMA exhibit, but like as a movie. Or like if you've ever been to like any MoMA sort of atmosphere and you've watched
Sure.
like one of the like mini movies they have, it's like if they did like a whole feature length film.
Which that sells it to me. Like I think that's fantastic, but I can see that
I think
that's
for me it's
annoying
too
for some.
long for that
Sure.
kind of thing.
I can
So
see that.
I didn't feel like I was retaining all. You mentioned it was dense. I think just for me and maybe some others, it's a lot without any through line. So that's why I was kind of like,
I guess I don't. I thought there was, but I think it's not. It's not directly thorough line. It's a lot of things that seem kind of inconsequentially misconnected. But to me, thinking back on it, I thought they all tied together in a really fascinating way. But it's definitely unconventional, which I think is going to
oh yeah, very
upset some
unconventional.
people. But I think Corey, you saw this one as well, right?
I did. I think it's startling. I mean, I think that what it does is what I think is just what I love about documentary filmmaking, and just this. It feels like a very roundabout form of investigative journalism, with the way that I think it just so openly studies, like police body cameras are huge. Like that's kind of like the fixed point in which he's kind of studying and builds around that, and just the fact that we might not be equipping police officers with body cameras that are necessarily going to help depict truth in those moments, like especially when things get violent, just like puts, scorpions under my skin. Just like that terrifies me to think that you can, that, that there are powers that are working to help subvert technology to make it more appealing for people to purchase that might, favor situations and, skew narrative in a way that kind of helps those in power. And I think that's just like, because it goes back and studies how the camera and the gun are kind of interlinked, and just the dangers of surveillance, the dangers of not being able to fully understand what you're looking at. And it's not a film that I think you can just like close your eyes and point to something and then just be like, let's talk about this, because I think it just encompasses so many different ideas about surveillance, about the rolling of, the way we look at technology. But I admire so much the boldness in which it just like throws some stuff out there that's legitimately disconcerting. But I will say the only thing about it is that like I wish it would have dove into some of the stuff more, because if you're trying to make an argument that this push to put body cameras on police officers could be faulty because the technology could be skewed, I feel like I could have used more room to expand there.
Sure, that's fair. I mean, I will say, for me, I'd rather at this point in my life see a film that overreaches and does more than it can really chew on and tries to tackle a bunch of different things at once than a film that's content to just be small scale and just kind of do like something expected, I guess. I mean, that's not to say that those type of films are bad. I'm just saying for me personally, I think I'm more willing to indulge a film like this just because I like that it's exploring all these different topics and it's challenging all these different things, and it talks about many different things that I've never really thought or considered to this much intensity. And so I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked really well. I can see why it's not going to do it for everybody, but yeah, that was my favorite of the documentary selections for sure.
Hey, there were some fantastic documentaries, for sure. My favorite documentary was Summer of Soul, which was one of the last ones I saw. In parentheses, it's or when the revolution could not be televised. And this one, I was like blown away by. Just it's one of those movies about like forgotten history, you know, like when something happens, but because it's coming out of it's like the prototypical story of Harlem, because it's about like the Harlem music festival that was happening during Woodstock, and it was filmed and it was this fantastic thing, but Woodstock ate up all the publicity and it just was like lost to history until now. And this was the Sundance film that like got me out of my seat. You know, I was like dancing, you know, in the room, just like the music is tremendous. I can't believe how well filmed it is and how Questlove was able to just like stitch this thing together from all this archival stuff. And it's just such a shame that it had to be released, you know, like 50 years or 60 years actually, after the event itself, because they just couldn't release it. And it's just such a beautiful, wonderful watch. If you like, it's not really a concert film, in the traditional sense, but it's definitely a film that like it music is all the way through it, and particularly like Nina Simone's like portion of it is just like jaw dropping. It's just one of those documentaries that I think is near perfect. Like I wouldn't change a thing about it, honestly. And I think Will, you saw it too, right?
Yeah, I saw this one pretty early on, and I liked it quite a bit too. It's easily in my top 10. I'd probably, if I had to rank it, I'd probably put it 7, like right after Crypto Zoo. I really enjoyed it a lot. I think it's easily one of the most entertaining films of the festival, and for many of the reasons you mentioned, I think it just captures this moment in history that has mostly been forgotten, or in many cases has been completely forgotten. Because I mean, obviously, I didn't know anything about it, and I imagine most people who go into it won't either. But there's just so many individual moments that stand out to me, particularly one involving a montage with the moon landing, in conjunction with the music festival. That is just one of my favorite moments of any of the movies we saw at the festival. Just for what it's able to accomplish and how it's able to show this point in history. And it shows to me that Questlove, he isn't just lucky that he has this footage. Like, he clearly has some talent and some passion as a filmmaker that suggests that if he wanted to pursue this more, he could probably do some really interesting and cool things as a filmmaker. And I'm excited to see if that's the case. But yeah, as far as this film itself, I think it's definitely a lot of fun, and I'm very glad that Hulu bought it, because I think it'll do well in their service.
So a lot of you listening, you've probably caught on at this point where you're like, that's strange. It seems like every movie John talks about, Will's seen too. And here's why. Here's what kept happening throughout the festival. I would watch something and be like, I liked this. And then this wasn't Summer of Soul, by the way, obviously. It's the other way around. But then Will would be like, all right, I'm going to watch this movie now. And then he would break my heart and be like, the movie sucks, John. You were wrong about it. So this happened 10, 15 times, I think
twice. No, actually, sorry. I think it only happened once. In any, like, in the sense that, like, you saw something, were flirted by it or loved it, and I saw it and I didn't like it. And I think the film you're referring to is Superior, which I mean, there's Wild Indian, which admittedly I saw before you, which I also didn't like, but you did, and Corey liked it as well, from what I can tell. But I
don't know what was going on with Wild Indian. That's in my top 10 for sure. That movie is terrific. I was like, I don't know. I feel like we're still working through that one. I want to understand. I know I'm not work for you.
I know I'm not alone on it, because the reactions I saw on Letterboxd were pretty mixed, but I don't know. I'm glad you guys got something out of it. I didn't get whatever you two saw out of it, and like I said, I heard all this hype beforehand, so that might have prevented me from enjoying it in full. But I don't know. But Superior is one where I like the look of it, and I like the concept, and I think the approach to it is very acutely funny at times. I just don't really think it adds up to a whole lot, but that could just be because I saw it at a certain point in the festival and I wasn't able to give it my full attention, and I just kind of took it at face value and just like, okay, whatever, and moved on. But I'm very curious. That's one of the ones I wanted to talk about you the most, just because I just want to know what in particular about that film stood out and why you consider it one of the best of the fest. Because I'm not trying to be critical. I'm not trying to dismiss what you got out of it. I'm just very curious to know what it is that you actually got out of the film.
Yeah, I mean, Superior is about, it takes place in the 80s. And it's about a pair of identical twins who basically switch places, but in the context of a crime thriller. And the twist is that like one of them knows it's a crime thriller and the other doesn't.
Yeah, I described it as Todd Solondz's The Parent Trap, which I think is a fun way to describe it, but may not be fully accurate. But nevertheless, go ahead.
It's a good starting point, sure. And you mentioned the look of it. That's a big part of it. I think that like the movie's willingness to embrace the tacky side of the 80s is very notable. And at its core, it is a movie about like the polar ends of like liberating yourself versus constraining yourself, and like the extremes of those two different things. And it's one of those rare movies where you're actually able to have like almost a science experiment within a movie. It's like, if you put people in different roles, how do they come out of it, and what is the end result? And it's just the kind of movie where, as you're entertained by it, as you're like watching these performances and like entertained by even like the simplest things of like seeing a woman who is clearly like bored by her life, getting the most enjoyment of the world by working at an ice cream shop for a day. And like, that to me is like entertainment of like, that's how invested I was. I was like, I feel like this character needs to go on some sort of odyssey. And then she does. And then, it's just one of those rare movies that like did not have to do a lot, I think, to get its point across. I mean, it sounds like it didn't get its point across for you, Will, but
Oh, I got what the intent was. I mean, I get all that. I just didn't find that to be, I guess, as interesting or investing as you did, because I don't think it's doing anything that's particularly unique to this genre. But
maybe I think the uniqueness is in sort of the gimmick, the concept, and I think like the overall presentation. I mean, if you distill it down to like what it's kind of as a, like what it is as a plot,
yeah.
it's a pretty generic thriller where
But
like
I'm
person's
yeah,
on the loose and
right.
dangerous and yeah.
But I'm talking like I'm not even talking from like a story standpoint. Like the style of it is so downplayed and dry, which I tend to like, but I felt like for this type of film, it felt so kind of downplayed to a point where I just don't really like. I'm not quite sure what all the filmmaker wanted the film to achieve for the audience. Like I'm not 100% sure what
I
it
think
was like.
to
Yeah,
get you to care about a world that is mundane
sure,
and to like find the like because I think
but
you're
it's
either supposed
so
to be connecting with
yeah,
Vivian or Marion. And if you're connecting with Vivian, it's because you recognize that there can be beauty in the mundane things. And if you're
sure.
connecting with Marion, it's because you're feeling like the past is always coming back to get you. And it's like coming at the human experience from two different angles. And I think it pulls off both.
I guess I felt like it's so divorced from any like tangible reality that I would know that I didn't get like any like meaningful life lessons out of it or anything like that. Like I think the themes that it discusses are fun to explore, but I don't really think it does anything that's terribly unique. Like it's kind of going for like a De Palma thing, which is fun. It's like kind of like De
Very
Palma by
fun.
way of like Jared Hess. Even though I brought up Todd Solondz before, I think Jared Hess is maybe a little bit more apt in terms of like what the style is going for. But yeah,
And
I mean,
speaking of
yeah,
divorce, I think poor Corey is just like, you know,
yeah, sorry.
mom, dad,
Please stop fighting.
No, I mean,
we bicker like
yeah.
sisters, Corey. Don't worry.
I know.
I mean, to me, like Wild Indians more the type of film where I'm like, I have more of an active response in terms of like being like, I don't get what you two get out of the film. Uh, with Superior, I'm just kind of more like, yeah, I mean, I can appreciate what it's doing. I just don't. I mostly I didn't get that much out of it, but I can appreciate it aesthetically. I think it looks great, especially with the 16 millimeter and all the sets. Like the sets, every one of those, I would love to just like live in there and just like spend an afternoon just like hanging out in the kitchen or like in the ice cream shop or whatever. I don't even like ice cream, and I would like to spend some time in that place. But maybe playing video games with the guy. But yeah, I think. I think it's admirable what it's doing. I like the style. I'd love to see what the filmmaker, does next. But with this film, I don't know. I always felt at arm's length with it in a way that clearly you were a lot more in it than I was, which is cool. I appreciate that you're able to get that much out of it. But for me,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
felt lacking for some reason.
For me, the emotion was in just like what it says about the contentment of life. There was a lot of Pedro Almodovar in it that I felt was really like
I
understated
was
a little
wishing there
bit.
was more of that. Like when I saw like the picture for it on the site, I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be like Almodovar. It's gonna be fantastic." And I didn't get
I
that
think
much
there
from.
was, but just not.
Yeah,
It's not the flashy side of his
sure.
work. I think it's the
Yeah,
more like calm and, like I said, understated. It's
maybe
very, very
that's.
subtle with some of its points. But
I
I could
guess so.
see why that would be straining for people. Some
Yeah,
people.
maybe I just like the flashiness of Almodovar more than that kind of mundane quality that he has. But I don't know. I mean, it's one night. Like I said, I don't feel like terribly strong about one way or the other in typical Will Ashton fashion. I think it's admirable what it's doing. Like I said, I just didn't get that emotional investment that you got of it. But that's fine. I mean, there's at least a few movies that I saw that I clearly had more of an emotional response to than you did. For instance, We're All Going to World's Fair, which still unsettles me. Like I was thinking about it today, and I was haunted by it. And I guess for you that you had kind of like a
I'm
ho hum
haunted by it.
experience. Okay.
I'm definitely am haunted by it. I just, yeah, something about that movie just did not register as a. I'm glad I saw this haunted by
Okay.
it. It's weird.
Well, there you go.
Um,
I mean,
yeah,
that's where those are I think the main ones where we diverge too strong. Like everything else I think I at least liked that you loved and
yeah,
vice
we're
versa.
pretty similar on most other things. Sure.
Sure. But yeah, those are like the three where we clearly had some divide, which happens when you watch 40 something movies in a week, but there you go.
All right, Corey. Will and I we went through our stuff. So we'll take it back to you. Let's wrap this thing up. Go ahead and list just one or two more favorites that you just want to highlight, and then we'll start to wind things down from
Yeah,
there.
of course. One of my legitimately favorite films I saw that whole festival was Flea. I think Flea is marvelous. Like, I'm a
Really
sucker
good.
for animation. I've not seen Waltz with Bashir, so I am kind of
It's
getting
very
in.
good.
Yeah, sure. I hear it's very, very good. And I heard that was referenced a lot when talking about this film, since it's kind of taking on like a documentary style with animation. But I thought it was outstanding. I mean, just if you're looking at just such a fascinating like duality of kind of a young gay Afghan refugee who's coming out of the Mujahideen, and just his journey of what he and his family had to go through just to get on solid ground, and just the ramifications of how he has to grapple with how he's weaved his own life's narrative as the years have gone on, and kind of the dueling identity between who he becomes and what he is, what he has been, and just the tender heart that it has for, I think at times, what very sadly gets politicized, and just looking at people who are leaving countries, and just kind of the hell they have to go through just to be able to say like I'm safe and I can be somewhere where I can kind of start again when the world that I'm in kind of falls apart. But I think it's marvelous. Like, I think I'm really excited. I will see it again when they do the version with Rid Ahmed voicing the main character when the English edition comes out. But I think it's really, really good. And Neon's picked it up. They're going to know what to do with it. So I look forward to that film getting a big moment when it comes out. And you guys mentioned President, which I think is outstanding too. Like, I think that there's some of the documentaries like this. Like, I love Summer of Soul as well. So some of the documentaries in this were just so good. And that one's about the election in Zimbabwe a couple years ago, and their attempt at having a free election after years under dictatorship, and just the rigors of that. Just some of the footage they get is outstanding and just terrifying, and it's just such a relevant film for what we're going through now, or what we've just been through for the last few months. And a couple other little ones. I love Jockey with Clifton Collins. I thought he was great in that film.
I like that one. It wasn't as amazing, but I
Yeah.
definitely can see why it's getting all the love. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's pretty good.
And I guess the only other film I would bring up is just being like, I would hope people watch it when it comes out. I really, really liked, I like Together, but I think one of my favorite other narrative films was the new Ben Wheatley film, In the Earth. I find myself thinking about that one a lot. And for movies that were made in the UK during the pandemic, it is much, much, much better than Lockdown, which I think is a terrible movie. I just regret having watched that. But In the Earth is kind of like a Annihilation meets 10 Cloverfield Lane with like some sprinkles of like midsummery folks horror put into it. I'm not quite as well versed in Ben Wheatley's filmography as others, but I'm really interested to go back and look now because of the way he kind of mixes in just this like mundanity of living through a pandemic, and the kind of the treading lightly ground we're all in right now, with this just like grand folk horror about our relationship with nature, and the difference of people trying to find meaning at things at times that doesn't really have a lot, which I think is what people can tend to do in moments like a pandemic, and the extremes people will go to try to reason in their mind why things are happening. It's a very compelling movie that I feel like gets better and better the more I'm removed from it. So I'm excited to see
It's a
people.
big improvement over Rebecca, his last film.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I disagree with you, John, is that, or John, with you, Corey, is that
you just want to disagree with me,
sure,
Will. It's like...
sure, it's in my nature. Yeah, it's like another thing, John. Yeah, no, I like In the Earth. I definitely think it's a better film, like you said, than either Rebecca or Lockdown. But it's the one that I think of the ones I've seen at the festival. I've actually thought about the least. Like, I kind of forgot about it until now. In terms of like
same here.
Yeah, like I was like I like what it's doing. I just don't think it fully comes together until the end.
Interesting.
Like
Yeah.
And I think the end is just like 100% pure Wheatley, nutsiness that I really enjoyed. But I felt the build up to it was this kind of like mixed bag. Like, some of it's fun. There's like one supporting character in it that's just so maniacally goofy that I appreciate a lot. But yeah, I appreciate the film. I like it. I definitely think it's a worthwhile watch. I would say it's probably towards the middle of the ones I saw at the festival.
Fair enough. It's weird. Like, I feel like for pandemic content, because we know it's coming. Like we know we're going to spend the next couple of years just parsing through pandemic movies, and eventually a film will probably win Best Picture that's about the pandemic. You're going to have great pandemic performances and crappy versions of it. It's just, I don't know. It's just so interesting that this is kind of like the ground level films that we're going to get. And I was very enticed by the way that it dealt with things. And, it's probably, I think all the films that I mentioned are on a different plane, but it's just kind of, because I watched it at midnight, so just for that midnight vibe and enjoying the movie right before I go to bed, like I dug it, and I hope that if people like that type of movie, that you see it, because Neon will put it out sometime this year.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Corey, the movie you're talking about that's going to win Best Picture is Ron Howard's Fauci, starring Tom Hanks.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Or Tom Hooper. It could be Tom Hooper.
Okay, Will Ashton. Any last couple of favorites you want to mention before we finish this thing out? Let's go. Let's hear all about it.
Yeah, like we said, we mentioned President, which I agree with Corey. I think that's just a first-rate journalistic account of the Zimbabwe 2018 government election. Just harrowing stuff to watch. And I believe, John, you got to sneak it in towards the end as well, so you have seen it. I really like that one. I think it's on the cusp of being great if we got a little bit more perspective from him. I think like he seems like maybe a little bit the presidential candidate. I think I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about him as a person beyond just like his political speeches and his interactions with his staff. But beyond that, I think everything it does is just incredibly well done. A lot of incredible footage. There's a protest scene that's like some of the most like shocking documentary footage that I've seen in a good while. But yeah, I mean, in addition to those films that we mentioned, one other documentary that I really like that, unfortunately, I think is kind of getting a muted response from the rest of the festival. So this might just be more of a me thing, but I know Corey has seen it as well, which is The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, which is the documentary about Bjorn Anderson. I might be mispronouncing his last name, so I apologize. But primarily he's known as the child performer from Death in Venice, the 1971 film, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's just exploring his personal story from adulthood, and as well as like a troubled childhood where he was never fully able to become a boy, but he still wrestles with these things from his childhood so he can never fully become a man as well. And it's such a beautiful, very sad documentary that is told in this very lyrical, kind of poetic way that I can see it rubbing some people the wrong way, because it has like this kind of not whimsical, but like kind of like a delicate approach that it favors kind of like some like flashy angles and stuff like that I think might take some people out if you don't like that in your documentaries. But I thought it was really compelling and really enriching experience to watch, and it was one I saw just before the festival began in earnest, and at the time it was my favorite film at the festival before I saw it on the count of three. So that's one I hope people find it. I hope people get as much out of it as I did. But I know, Corey, you liked it as well. Maybe not as much as I did, but I think to some extent you did as well, right?
I gotta say, that one gets better as I get removed from it. It is haunting as hell, and it just so, I think, eloquently breaks down just what fame can do, particularly at a time in the world where we really weren't able to see where the world was going. Like, I feel like, obviously society, I think, went through a pretty major shift in 1970. And we kind of saw the world beginning to open up in new ways, and just the way that, that was such a horrible, horrible situation for that child to be in, where obviously the tragedy that's going on with his mother and his grandmother trying to kind of exploit him, I feel like, is the only way you can put it, for his ability to be cast in this film, and just the loss that he suffers later in his life. And just, again, you're right, he's not able to grapple with the reality of what it means to go through life's natural progressions, because his life has never been natural. And it just, I don't know, I think it's very worthy of watching. It's one of those movies where Will was talking about it, and I was just kind of like, I don't really know if that really seems like it's my thing, but we're recommending movies for each other each week, so that's what he recommended for me. So I'm like, yeah, I'll give this a go. And I actually really thought it was good. So I'm really curious to see when it will find. It's like, if it finds a good distributor, it feels like a Neon film to me. I really hope they pick it up, because I think they'll really get at the audience it needs. But I actually think it's quite good.
Nice. Other than that, my other big favorite from the festival was one that Corey wasn't particularly fond of, but John liked even more than I did, which is Crypto Zoo, which I just mentioned not too long ago, which is a very bizarre, very beguiling animated film for adults, very much for adults. Don't bring the kids to this one, but yeah, I think this one, the more I think about, the more I appreciate its absurd, cute little qualities, and I think Magnolia picked it up, and I'm very curious to see what the response is to it, because it definitely got a divided response from the festival, to the point where until John had seen it, I'm like, maybe I'm just like, maybe I was just in a daze when I saw it, and I just, got more out of it than I should have. But John suggests that was not only false, but I might have been underselling the film.
I think
when I
so.
saw, yeah. So, yeah, why don't you share your thoughts on that one, John? I'm very curious to see why you're so high on it. I think I know why, but I want to hear more from you.
Well, I am very high on it. I just was watching it, and I think like the world building in this is very, very unique, and it's just one of those movies where the more I learned about what was going on in this world and what these characters are up to and doing, the more I connected to it and like found a kindred spirit in it. I mean, the whole concept is that like there are these like mythological creatures all over the world kind of disguising themselves. It's like ugly Americans kind of, but also, American Dragon, Jake Long, like whatever, take your pick of like a magical realism, hidden world kind of concept. But the idea
shows? Are these shows that you're referencing?
I am. I'm referencing.
Oh, okay. I don't know any of these things. Here. Okay, sorry.
And the idea, of course, is that like, oh, these creatures exist, but they have to be in hiding because humans don't get them. But then it becomes like Jurassic Park in the sense where like this person is creating a zoo for cryptids called Crypto Zoo, which, full disclosure, I thought this was a documentary about cryptocurrency before I watched it. So I was very surprised.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't know anything about it. So I was just like, oh, Crypto Zoo. I wonder what that, maybe it's just about the crazy Bitcoin crisis.
I would love to see what your response was to the opening scene if that's the case.
I was like, wait. Absolutely.
I've heard of sharing data, but this is ridiculous.
But yeah, no, that opening scene sets the tone quite well, I think, for like what you're in for. And I saw Amanda the Jedi, who's been on the show before. She referred to it as Jurassic Park on acid. And that is absolutely accurate, because it's the kind of thing where you're watching it and there were so many times where like they were doing things with the animation. It's like paper, it's not like super fancy, animation. It's hand drawn sort of, but at times it's like stencils.
It's the same guy who made My Entire High School Was Sinking into the Sea, which if anyone has seen that, it's exactly the same style. It's a little bit goofier in its approach, but it's definitely the same filmmaker in every respect. So yeah.
And with this, it's like, it's just so endlessly creative. Like every scene was something new and different. It's not just showing characters in a plane. It's like zooming in on the plane and then just like the panels of the plane disappear. So you see them in the clouds. And I'm just like, this is what I want. I want scenes that try really hard and they go above the norm, and they're not just trying to like recapture a feeling you've had before, but to sort of like place you into like a new zone of just like whimsy. And it has its times where it has its moments where it has its one-dimensional villains, it has its like weird circumstances, but it always balances it out with like really fun surprises and really good payoffs with like what these creatures do, how they get brought up and come back. There is a standout character in here named Pliny, who is just
the hero of Sundance.
The hero of 2021 could be. So yeah, I'm just absolutely in love with Crypto Zoo. I want to see it like so many more times. It's my kind of jam. It really is. I think that some people, it's not their thing.
Sure.
And I don't know what is, but for me it is. I don't know. I think this is the one though, Will, where like I was very happy that I liked this, even more than you did, or like we're close to it, because it's just such a wonderful little gem of a film, and I'm so happy that Dash Shaw was able to make it, and that he was able to like really make something that he wanted to make. I get that 100% from him. Like I don't see like any compromises in the story or the characters, any of it.
Yeah, I mean, even beyond the aesthetics of it, I think what it says about like the like having a flawed eco culture, like this kind of like liberal safe haven, and the like struggles of like balancing idealism with individualism is also really fascinating and inspired as well. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people are going to get that out of it. I think it's tackling a bunch of things in terms of its thematics, but I think to agree with what you're saying, it's such an enveloping type film where it just felt like I was like transported into this like otherworldly place that was, you know, very acutely bizarre, but also I felt very fun and endearing. And I can see why it's not working for everyone. It's definitely, some people are very not a fan of this, which you know, to each their own. I'm more disappointed than anything that some people aren't getting anything out of it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, not my absolute favorite of the festival, but some of my favorite moments in the festival by far, and definitely one that if there's like a handful of movies I want to revisit just to see if they match my initial impressions, and this is certainly one of them. So I was definitely a fan for sure.
Okay. I only have one last film to talk about in terms of my favorites, and Will knows what's coming.
I do.
Well, and I'm sure Corey does
Sure.
as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the last films I saw at the festival, it was like right before I saw President, so it was the last day of the fest, was One for the Road, which I will just say right here, this is like has gone down as like the best movie I've ever seen out of Sundance. My best like Sundance experience film. And I was thinking about it, and I think this is like my favorite like film in like several years. Like there's just no film that has had an effect on me like this one has. So this one's from Boz Poonpira, who did Bad Genius, one of my favorite films from 2017. And like I had heard like very, very negative things about this, like very mixed to, you know, middling, you know, some B's and B minuses, a lot of C's and C minuses. And I ended up watching it because one of my friends on Twitter was like, oh, you know, I saw it. And it was actually one of my favorites of the fest. And I was like, oh, you know, I was nervous because I was like, oh, am I going to be disappointed? I really like this director, Bad Genius, which is such a great movie. Is this going to be kind of like, you know, I saw the poster and I was like, I don't know, it just kind of looks like a ho-hum narrative. I didn't know the story. I started watching and it was slow to get into it in some, it's a 2.5 hour movie. And I was kind of, you know, like, oh, you know, I'll get through this. Like it's, you know, it's nothing special though. I didn't find myself very captivated. But then when the road trip dynamics kind of like kick in, and there's a period in this movie where for me it went from enjoyable or like moderately enjoyable straight to, oh my word, I'm loving this. And it's a movie that's kind of like blending a lot of different sweeping emotional genres. You know, it's very melodramatic. It's very sappy and sanguine, and some would say treacly. But for me, I thought every single like overwhelming emotion in this movie was absolutely perfectly set up and deserved, because I think it doesn't start off that way, and I think it slowly does it, and then just like it's like a roller coaster of like bringing you up and up and up and up, and then the film just like goes way down. There's a section in this movie where I couldn't believe that it kind of became like another film. It kind of like went back in time, and it sort of just like reset what I was watching, and the outcome of that is like the ending, which is just like one of my favorite movie endings now. This is like one of my new favorite movies. I mean, I have that shot like stuck in my head, like and it won't get out. You know, this is a Thai film like Bad Genius. It's wonderful just for the discovery of it. Even if you don't like it even close to as much as I do, I think that people will have a lot to appreciate about like being able to explore Thailand in this new way, and you know, seeing all these different locations and kind of like examining the experience of like people who move to America from Thailand and then what it's like going back. It's a movie about relationships and your exes, and using like pop culture and even something like mixology and you know, making drinks as a way to sort of like cope with heartbreak. It's stuff like that that is just so original and so different that when I see these reviews and people are just sort of like, yeah, you know, this thing is just nothing. I don't feel anything. And I'm almost jealous because I ended this movie and I was like happy sobbing, you know, and I'm not, you know, I get emotional during movies. We've talked about it. But like, this is the second time in a month that I've actually like sobbed during a movie. And these are the first 2 times I've ever sobbed during films. So
Yeah,
that said, I think this has something to do with me. Maybe, maybe
I think you
going
just
through
need to
something.
see. I think you need to stop watching buddy comedy dramedies where one friend has cancer. I think that they're doing
I know.
something to you that's very upsetting and concerning. That I think you just kind of need to figure that out on your own.
Perhaps. I genuinely, that is the weird connective tissue. I don't have cancer. That's not like something that's affecting me directly right now. So, for
I
anyone
was
who's
honestly going
curious,
to ask that because I was like, is this like something in your personal life that I need to know about? Because
it's not. It's not.
okay,
No, no. And I definitely don't want anyone to get that impression because it's definitely not the case. But no, I think the universal themes of it. It has nothing to do with the terminal illness. It's all about. I think I'm a sucker for films that are mainly about friendship. It's why I really like Together. That was such a funny movie, but also such a great message about friendship. And this one I think is working on the same level. And like, I just like the movie that can do both. It can have what I like about romantic movies, but mixes it with like heartbreak, and it mixes it with friendship, and it mixes it with like broken friendship, and it does all these things at once. And that's why I just think that it's like a tremendous, masterfully done film, and I'm just in love with it. So yeah, this is gonna end up being like my rare like A+ film that I feel very happy about dishing because it really is that for me. And I'm like genuinely upset that I can't rewatch it already. Like have been like sitting here being like I want to watch it again, and I
calling
can't.
the reps and
Huh?
calling the reps and talking to people at
Yeah.
Sundance and having sternly worded phone calls and all that.
Yeah, play Yaya Ding Dong.
Yeah.
But no, Will, I think in your review you said that you liked it even more than I did.
I mean, yeah, as much as one can like something more than you did, but I
Wow, you hear that,
uh,
Corey? It's full blast, full blast.
That was snarky.
all I'll say is I did like the film. I don't have that emotional connection to it that you did. I wish I did. I like I said before earlier in the episode, I think I don't know, maybe it was just because I saw it at the very almost tail end at the festival. And like I maybe if I was a little bit more animated and able to kind of look at this film in a theatrical way, I could maybe get as much, if not, I don't know if I can even get more out of it than you did, but I there's a lot I like about it. I mean, visually it looks splendid. I do like the playfulness of the approach. The two lead performances I think are quite good. And I definitely appreciate all the little nods and winks to I hope I pronounce this right, Wong Kar-wai's filmography.
Yeah.
He's a producer on the film. One of the rare films that he's produced that he didn't also direct, which is pretty fascinating. I'm very curious to know how that came about. But there's certainly a lot of nods to his films that I think are fun. There's also a nod to John Woo's film that I was like, oh, okay. Yes, John Woo likes stuffs. But I don't know. I mean, I think for me, what kept me from loving it was the middle, which I kind of felt a little bit repetitious to me in a way that made me feel the weight of it, and I think kind of took a little bit out of my goodwill out of it. But I think this is going to be one of the biggest crowd pleasers that comes out of the festival, and I think in a traditional year, like I can't imagine going from Coda to One for the Road and just like having such an overwhelming kind of emotional experience from both those films. I think John, you would have to like collect yourself, I think.
It's a good thing I watched one at the very beginning and one at the very
Right.
end.
But yeah, no, I definitely liked it. I mean, I think it's a good film. I enjoyed it, and maybe if I revisit it later down the road, I'll be closer to where you are. But as it stands, I like it. Yeah.
All right. I'm sure there is way more we could talk about. There's tons of other movies we saw, good movies that we just don't even have time to even get into.
This is terrible. I feel like I'm hijacking the conversation here. I feel like we have to say something about that a new Edgar Wright film played at Sundance.
That's true. Sparks Brothers.
Yeah.
I didn't see it though. You two did, and you said good things about it. So
Yeah, I liked it.
I did. I liked that. And it's just so weird that like Wright's like legitimately one of my favorite filmmakers working of anything. And like this is his first new movie in like 4 years. And like it's just such a fascinating discussion about this band that like never got any sort of prominence, but has always seemed to be ahead of the curve of like paving the way for others. It's kind of like your favorite musician's favorite musician, I suppose. But I feel like we needed to like at least briefly mention that like Edgar Wright made a gigantic fan documentary for like what seems like his favorite band, I suppose, and that like it's probably going to like explode this band's relevancy later in its career. And the new Leo Carras film, Annette with Adam Driver, these are the guys that are doing the music for that. So I'm very curious what life that film is going to have, because we basically get 2 Edgar Wright movies this year, which is a very nice kind of reward for having survived the last year. But I feel like that's like, if I had to bring one more movie up, that'd be it.
Yeah, like I said, there's just so many. And I think like one of the last things I'll say before we have to close it out here, I think that if you've never attended Sundance or been into the Sundance scene, I think that like, and if let's say it's virtual again next year for whatever reason, I think it's really important people prioritize documentaries, because I think the documentaries tend to be the more likely good movies at Sundance. I think is pretty fair to say, because I think Sundance has the reputation where it's like, it's where like the best documentaries tend to come out in a given year. It's a very documentary focused festival. There's obviously a lot of other great stuff, but if you're interested in Sundance, or if you're interested in like maybe watching some things for yourself after the fact, the documentaries tend to be just really good bets. And we didn't even cover like a morsel of the ones that are really good.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I agree with you, but I also say don't, at least from my experience, don't schedule like 4 documentaries in a row.
Yeah, it is a little tough to do that.
It gets a little exhausting after a while, because so many of these documentaries are emotionally intensive and true to life in obvious ways and stuff. So definitely seek them out, but maybe squeeze in a black and white narrative film about a woman or man living their life and enjoying themselves in between. So
I thought you were talking about Passing, just because
no, my joke there is that there are at least 3 films at the festival I saw this year that were slice of life, black and white period films. That
Dog Would Be Quiet.
The Dog Wouldn't Be Quiet, El Planeta, and
Esa Planeta.
Yeah, there you go. And Passing,
which I still haven't seen. That and Rita Moreno. I'm so behind.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about Rita Miranda. I was like, I might check that out later, and then just never had a chance to check that out. But I'm sure it was fine. I'm sure it was even good. But
yeah, I'm very interested in it, because it's definitely tied to my background and my interests. So
yeah.
Alas, that is all the time we have for our Sundance 2021 recap. And of course, throughout the year on Cinemaholics, we're going to be talking about these films and more throughout the year. So this was just kind of our early teaser. Hope you got something out of it. Before we go, Corey Woodruff, where can people find you online if they want to see more of what you're up to?
You can find me on Twitter at Corey Woodruff 47. I'm going to be writing up my entire experience for the Nashville scene, which is the alt weekly here in Nashville, where I'm an employee of the publication, where we're all kind of in the same house. So I'm excited to do that. And you see me interacting with John and Will, obviously, since we all have the camaraderie of being gigantic dorks. So that's where I am, and then constantly annoying Will with every time I have a movie idea. I text him, and he's very gracious to always
politely decline.
Yes.
Oh man. Thank you, Corey, for joining us. As always, you can catch me and Will on the main show with Abiel Chessie, and follow us on Twitter as usual in the show links. And I think that'll do it. All right. Well, from the Internet California, I am John Negroni.
From the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
From the Internet Nashville, I'm Corey Woodruff.
See you next time.